Young man is gunned down. The motive is shrouded in mystery.
We really couldn't figure out why there would be a shooting over something as silly as this.
You'd start thinking, this guy has something to hide.
To get to the truth, Lieutenant Joe Kenda must separate the con man from the con.
A street person can see a victim from a mile away.
And catch a vengeful killer who's armed and extremely dangerous.
Is that the shooter?
Last chance, bud. Come out with your hands up.
We're going to get to the bottom of this, no matter what. When you are an investigator involved in pursuing violent criminals, there is a risk factor that is always present. You're back to the subhuman animal that we all once were, attacking something that he sees as a threat. In reality, we're the most dangerous animal on this planet.
It's Friday night, and 20-year-old Oscar Redmond doesn't have a care in the world.
All of a sudden, he hears somebody ringing his doorbell, ringing his doorbell, ringing his doorbell.
I need your phone, man. Johnny's been shot.
It's his neighbor, Paul Chappelle.
Hello? 911? Yeah, my friend's been shot. Look, just get here right now.
Oscar runs over and finds his friend Johnny Crawford is on the floor.
What the hell, man? I gotta get out of here.
Oscar looks down, sees Johnny on the floor. There's blood coming out of his mouth.
I can't breathe.
Great, thank you.
Enjoy.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Can I get you anything else?
I think we're all set.
Okay, thanks, guys.
To us.
Going out to dinner with my wife was a rare event.
Or let's make it to you for putting up with me all these years.
I had made the incredible mistake of overlooking our anniversary because I was on another kiss. This was the makeup for that. I'm looking at this dinner
Looks great.
and I'm thinking this is going to be great.
Excuse me, Mr. Kenda. I'm so sorry, sir, but you have a phone call and they insisted that I get you.
It's Kenda.
Kathy responds with the narrow eyes, something one always wants to avoid with her, the narrow blue eyes.
Okay, I'll be right there. I'm so sorry. Stay and enjoy your meal. We'll try this again next week, I promise.
I felt absolutely awful when I was waiting to feel a steak knife in the back as I was walking out toward the door.
Minutes later, Kenda checks in with Detective Skip Arms.
Lieutenant,
Skip, so what do we got?
shooting upstairs in the victim's apartment. Victim's already been transported to St. Francis.
Do you know who the victim is?
A 19-year-old Johnny Crawford. He took one to the chest, one to the foot. Dead on arrival.
All right, so take a look.
I'm escorted up to the apartment in question. The crime scene itself is fairly simple to review because nothing has apparently been disturbed.
Excuse us for a second.
The victim is shot while he is sitting in an easy chair.
We also found a bullet hole in the wall and a bullet hole in the floor. So we know we had multiple shots fired.
3 markers are for the casings.
They all the same caliber?
Yep.
They're .25 caliber automatic. Somebody throws 3 bullets at this guy and hits him twice.
Found a weapon on the other side of the chair.
It's a hunting knife, cheap quality, that hunters carry to skin game with. But it's in a sheath and snapped in place.
The knife could raise a number of questions as to whether it was used in defense by the victim or if there was another assailant.
Nope, no blood.
But it'd be odd that somebody would put the knife back in the sheath if, in fact, it had been taken out.
Any witnesses?
Yeah, Johnny's roommate, Paul Chappelle, he was here during the shooting. He was outside in the hallway being questioned. And then their neighbor, Oscar Redmond, he came down after the shooting.
All right, we'll go talk to the roommate.
Oscar Redmond was an aftermath person. He doesn't really know what happened. He wasn't there when it happened. The guy that's more important to me is Mr. Chappelle.
You talked to him for a minute.
Because he is in this apartment when this whole event occurs.
So you're the roommate, Paul Chappelle?
Yeah,
How long have you known Johnny?
not long, a couple months.
Johnny Crawford was from West Virginia. He had heard that, maybe there was some work for him out here in Colorado Springs, so he was just trying to get his life started.
He came across some hard times and was out of a job when this incident happened.
So you were here when he got shot?
I didn't see it. I was in the kitchen the whole time. Johnny was in the living room talking to these 4 guys.
That surprised me a little bit. 4 people, that's important to know. So I said, do you know those people?
Actually, yeah, I knew one of them, Bud Carpenter. Johnny used to room with him at his old place.
Paul Chappelle says that there were 3 other men he'd never met before. 2 men with blonde hair, and a 3rd man who was very muscular and stood on the side.
What were they talking about?
I don't know, something about a guitar and an amp.
See our amp. Where's our guitar?
I don't know.
What about the amp? Could we just at least get our amp?
No, I don't know about that. You should probably go.
And then the next thing I know,
Swear to God,
things escalate.
Dude, whoa. Sit down.
He drops down to his knees and just kind of gets in a corner. But he hears them leave.
Paul says nothing prepared him for the scene he would encounter in the living room.
What the hell are you doing, man? Go get help.
And when I came out, the other guys had left, and Bud was giving Johnny CPR.
You say to yourself, well, he didn't do it because he was trying to help him. Well, not necessarily. It's not uncommon for people in a moment of anger to hurt someone, then be instantly overcome by sorrow and try to help them, try to stop what they have just done.
I ran upstairs to call 911, and when I got back, Bud was gone.
He left.
Yeah.
Anytime somebody runs, you think that they're running because they have something to hide. So you wonder, is that the shooter?
So this guitar and amp thing, is there any more you can tell me about that?
Actually, yeah.
He says, well, I haven't seen the guitar for a couple days. It hasn't been here, but the amp was here. And it was right there on the floor, and now it's gone. Those guys must have taken it.
Kenda wonders, could Bud Carpenter have had some unfinished business with his old roommate?
You still owe me 3 months' rent. It's not just gonna go away. This is $900.
Bud, take the kid's amp.
Damn right I'm taking your amp. Where's your guitar? I'm taking that too.
Man, I ain't giving you Is that right?
You know where I can find this, Bud?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Johnny had some old mail lying around. Okay.
Bud certainly doesn't want to be there when we get there. So we need to find it.
I'd be ready for anything.
We don't know what to expect. So we certainly are on edge.
He's in there.
Bud, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands up.
Is this the guy who shot Johnny Crawford 3 times? Well, we're about to find out. I have my hand on my gun when I hear that doorknob turn.
An argument occurred in an apartment between an individual who resided there and some people who came into that apartment. At least one of those persons was armed with a gun, and shots were fired during this argument. The individual who lived here was struck in the chest and the ankle by gunfire.
We're investigating the shooting of Johnny Crawford following a visit by 4 mysterious men. We've identified one of those 4 as Bud Carpenter, and I have ordered him out of his house.
Last chance, Bud. Come out with your hands up.
Don't shoot, please. Don't shoot.
Got any weapons?
No.
Put your hands on the wall. Go and check 'em. It's clean.
Bud comes across as fearful of the police, fearful of everything, maybe, but he's not dangerous.
But we just want to talk about what went on over at Johnny Crawford's house.
Okay.
Mind if we come in?
Yeah, yes, sir. Come on.
Now he's calming because he knows we're not going to drag him off the porch or anything else.
So, Bud, why'd you take off from Johnny's?
I had to. If the guys that shot Johnny saw me talking to the cops, they might shoot me too.
Bud is a fearful kind of guy. He thinks everyone's his enemy. So that's a perfectly reasonable explanation to me as to why he left.
Can you tell us what happened?
I was just visiting Johnny. We were just hanging out. And those 3 guys showed up.
Bud says that Johnny lets him in. He goes and sits down.
What happened after they showed up?
Started just arguing about guitar and an amp.
SDR amp. Where's our guitar?
I don't know.
The conversation turned more tense and it became more heated.
You guys think you're such badasses.
Bud was kind of afraid. And so he tried to divert his attention away from what was happening there and towards the TV.
I fought numb and I freak out kind of easy. Can't be around violence.
It's okay, Bud. Take your time.
It doesn't surprise me that this fellow is a Vietnam veteran. He has the demeanor of someone who does suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. They are fearful of conflict. People raise their voice. They want to leave the room.
And they started yelling and yelling about the guitar and the amp. Whoa!
And all of a sudden, he just goes quiet.
Bud? You okay?
You could see it in his face that he is in a total state of confusion, drifting back and forth between memory and event.
A lot of the vets who were in the Vietnam War era, they came home with a lot of mental scars that weren't treated because we didn't understand it at that time like we do now. And in his situation, it brought a whole flood back to him of what he had seen in the war.
And then they what?
Then he shot Johnny.
Bud stood up, sort of in a panic.
Sit down, or you're next.
But then the shooter pointed the gun at him.
All right, let's just get the amp and get out of here.
And then the fill over here has some bags under his eyes, and now he's just got black.
I don't know.
You could just see him glaze over. He put his face in his hands and he says, I just don't know. I've pressed him about as far as I can. It's time to let Bud alone.
Thanks, Bud. If you think of anything else, anything at all, let us know.
Harvey. Kept hearing the name Harvey. I don't know, maybe one of their names?
Okay, that's good, Bud. And thank you for your service.
and we left his home. I was concerned about him, but now I know something interesting. Who is Harvey?
Later that night, Kenda undertakes the grim task of informing Johnny's family of the murder.
Hello?
Hi, this is Lieutenant Kenda from the Colorado Springs Police Department. I was trying to reach Johnny Crawford's family.
This is his stepfather.
This guy says he's the stepfather to Johnny Crawford and is taken aback, of course, as you would expect.
I just don't believe it. His mother is going to be devastated.
Have you told Harvey yet?
Now my ears perk up. Who's Harvey?
Harvey is Johnny's big brother. He lives out there too.
No, I haven't spoken with him. Do you have a number I could reach him at?
He's kind of hard to get in touch with.
But you know he's got an aunt down in Rocky Ford he's close with.
He gives me the aunt's name and her number in Rocky Ford.
Thank you, and again, I'm very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
But when Kenda calls the aunt, he makes an unexpected connection.
Hello?
Hi, I was hoping to speak to someone regarding Harvey Crawford.
Who is this?
This is Lieutenant Kenda from the Colorado Springs Police Department.
Yeah, this is Harvey.
Harvey answers the phone.
Harvey tells Kenda that he knows his brother was killed and has been expecting to hear from the police.
Harvey, I need to speak to you. Is there somewhere we can meet face to face?
Yeah.
Harvey agrees to meet us at a diner. He doesn't want us to come to his aunt's house. He doesn't want to get her involved in this. Understandable.
Okay, I know where that is. I'll see you soon. Bye.
The next morning, Kenda and Detective Arms anxiously await the arrival of Johnny Crawford's big brother, with the hope he can lead them to the shooter.
Harvey shows up. He's wearing a hoodie. It looks as if he's in some sort of disguise.
Kenda?
Yeah, Harvey. Sit down.
He's a nervous wreck.
So what do you need to tell us?
It's kind of a complicated story, but I could probably tell you everything.
Well, I like the word everything, so Harvey, you have the floor.
Johnny moved out here from West Virginia, where we're originally from. And I told him I got this carpet laying business. I was making good money at the time. Or just roll it out.
At first, Johnny did well working for Harvey.
Same thing, roll it out.
But then business began to dry up.
Johnny moved all the way out here because I told him this work. And it's like, now I can't even pay him.
It was getting more and more difficult for Harvey not only to make money for himself, but to be able to pay Johnny. And of course, you know, as the big brother, you'd feel guilty about that.
Last week I met this guy at this bar. Says he wants to strike a deal or something. I'm desperate, man.
Going through some tough times, huh?
Yeah, it's an understatement.
Listen, maybe we can help each other out.
What do you mean?
Like if you really want to make some serious money.
I gotta do something.
Let's go outside. I got something I'm gonna show you.
All right, so what are we looking at here?
It's cocaine, man. You're cool with handling drugs, right?
Yeah. Sure.
Now, it's obvious to me, Harvey has no idea what he's doing.
So look, man, I'm willing to give it to you for a good deal. All right, I gotta split town. I can't have the on me.
He was willing to take a really low price for this cocaine if Harvey had the cash.
All right, we got a deal.
Yep.
30 minutes. I'll meet you back here. I just got to run to the bank. All right, we'll see you in a little bit. I mean, I saw this as a chance to try and provide for Johnny. I gave the dude everything I had.
So now Harvey finds himself the proud owner of 6 grams of cocaine. His problem is now he has no idea what to do with it.
Look, guys, I've never sold drugs before. I've never used cocaine before. I'm not into that. But luckily, a friend of mine, I mentioned my situation to.
What was the guy's name?
Oscar Redmond.
Well, there's a name we know. That's the downstairs neighbor, Oscar Redmond.
According to Harvey, a couple of days after he purchased the cocaine,
Hey, Harvey. Oh, hold on, man.
Oscar introduced him to a pair of brothers.
Got a couple of guys I'd like you to meet.
Okay.
This is Lance and Ted.
Nice to meet you, man.
We go way back.
Nice to meet you, Ted. Okay.
Yeah, we're looking to make a deal if you're interested, buddy.
They said they had a guitar and amplifier and that they might be willing to trade that guitar and amplifier for some cocaine.
All right. We'll meet you in the lobby in like 10 minutes. How's that? I'll take you up. Okay. I appreciate it. All right.
Cool. See you guys inside.
So you went through with it?
Yeah. Look, I'm a musician. I'm not a drug dealer. I know how to sell a guitar. I could sell you an amp or something, but I was desperate. I just needed the rent money for Johnny. Look, I'm telling you, Lance and Ted, they killed my brother.
Harvey, that doesn't make sense. Your brother wasn't even part of the deal. Why would they want to kill him?
Now Harvey is acting evasively, and he realizes that his story needs some backup, which he's unwilling or unable to provide.
Look, it's just a feeling I have, I'm telling you.
No, it isn't, Harvey. It's not a feeling. You know more than you're telling us. We're going to get to the bottom of this, and aside from finding you at that bottom, we're going to find everybody else as well. We're investigating the death of Johnny Crawford. We're now in contact with his brother Harvey, who says he knows who did it, but we also believe that Harvey knows why it was done. And Harvey, so far, hasn't told us.
Cut the crap, Harvey. Why would Lance and Ted have anything against Johnny?
All right, look, I didn't tell you about everything with the guy at the bar and the drug deal.
We're listening.
I'm not sure that cocaine I bought was the real deal.
And why is that?
Harvey tells us that the person sold him 6 grams of cocaine for $200. You know, this is really an unbelievably low price, and one would suspect that maybe it's of questionable quality.
A street person can see a victim from a mile away. This guy takes one look at Harvey and makes the correct assessment.
$200, it's yours.
Certainly, the price was the first thing that should have triggered some suspicion.
Instead, Harvey thinks, hey, what a deal.
Let me take a look at what you got.
He had heard somewhere that if you put a little bit on your tongue and it gave you a numb sensation, then it would be good cocaine.
All right, we got a deal.
Harvey claims he didn't realize anything was amiss until a few days later, when Oscar Redman brought him a message from Lance and Ted.
Hey, Harvey, listen. I just saw Ted and Lance, and they're pretty pissed.
Oscar told him that Ted and Lance wanted to get the guitar and amp back, or someone was going to get shot.
Harvey, listen, this is serious.
All right, look, just forget about it. Could care less. I thought it was just a bunch of crap. A few days go by, I don't hear a word about it. I sell the guitar, get the money.
Sometimes stories, true stories, are bizarre because you assume a certain level of intelligence. Harvey has been mercifully spared of the ravages of intelligence. When threats of shooting comes forward,
don't worry about it. They're harmless.
His reaction is to ignore this and it'll all somehow go away.
Kenda wonders, did Lance and Ted come looking for Harvey? And when they couldn't find him, decide to take their vengeance out on Johnny instead?
I just feel really bad. It's like I'm indirectly responsible for my brother's death.
Well, you're wrong there, Harvey. You are directly responsible for your brother's death. Johnny has nothing to do with this. His only crime is that A, he is related to Harvey, and B, he is home when they arrive.
Okay, Harvey. Where do we find Lance and Ted?
How about the third guy that was with him? Big muscular guy.
Guys, I don't know. Oscar probably does. He and the brothers grew up together in Nebraska or something. That's all I know.
Now, that makes sense to me because Redmond introduces these brothers to Harvey in the first place.
All right, we appreciate the information. We'll be in touch.
So now it's time to talk to Oscar Redmond again. The first time we encountered him, we thought he was nothing more than an uninvolved witness. Now we know he had everything to do with it.
There are always going to be those people who will tell you as little as they think they can get away with. So it's pretty common for us to have to go back and talk to somebody 2 or 3 times before we might get the full story.
When Kenda and Arms reconnect with Oscar at his apartment, they make their intentions crystal clear.
Oh, hey, detectives.
Oscar, we need to talk.
And his face falls.
I think there's a few things you need to tell us about who shot Johnny Crawford.
He has the look of someone who realizes the cat is out of the bag.
Well, I introduced Ted and Lance to Harvey.
He says that I was just trying to be friendly. They both had a need for each other.
We know there was a third guy with the brothers the night of that shooting. Big muscular fella. You know who that is?
That was probably Ralph Spencer. Dude's huge.
But it's obvious during this conversation that Oscar knows the brothers really well. He knows them so well, he even knows Ralph Spencer as the only big guy that they associate with.
Lance and Ted. What are their last names?
Nixon.
Write down everything you know.
He knows that Lance and Ted are from the same town he's from in Nebraska. He knows where they live. He knows what kind of car they drive. He knows the car has Nebraska plates.
I'm so sorry this happened. I knew they said they would shoot somebody. I just didn't believe it.
We'll be in touch.
We now know where Ted and Lance Nixon live, and that is where we are headed to.
As Kenda and his team close in on the trailer, it may be a matter of minutes before the case is wrapped up.
Police, open up!
There is no response.
Ready?
The door is locked, and we kick it in.
Police, let me see your hands!
We check every room of the trailer.
We're clear. Clear.
Nobody's there.
Yeah. There's a ramp.
Yeah.
But there is a guitar amplifier. All this trouble for this amplifier, and they leave it behind.
Let's go.
You're always hopeful you can turn this in a hurry, but now they're in the wind. So this has just become a lot more complicated. But turn it we will. We are now in pursuit of Ted and Lance Nixon for the murder of Johnny Crawford. The fact that these people are recent arrivals from the state of Nebraska, the likelihood is great as Nebraska is where they will go. We have listing information on their car. We know the plate number, and we put it on all points bulletin, but we have no idea how successful that's going to be.
Meanwhile, detectives turn their attention to the muscle-bound man with them the night of the murder.
We don't know where the Nixon brothers are, but we do have Ralph Spencer, so let's go find Ralph and find out what his story is.
Ralph Spencer?
Yeah.
We're with the Colorado Springs Police Department. Mind if we ask you a few questions?
Yeah, sure. But I gotta get to work.
He looks like he's a little bit hungover. His eyes are a red road map. Whatever Ralph did the prior night, he did a lot of it.
Mr. Spencer, what were you doing at Johnny Crawford's apartment last night?
Who?
Johnny Crawford?
I don't know that name. I was at the Candlelight Bar all night last night.
Let's try this again. What were you doing at Johnny's apartment with Lance and Ted Nixon?
Listen, I don't know those names. And I gotta go. I gotta get to work.
Okay. You wouldn't mind if we took a picture real quick, would you?
Sure, I guess.
Inside.
Even though he denies knowing Johnny Crawford.
Come on, Ralph. Give me a smile.
With his photograph, I can show that to witnesses, and the next conversation we have will be an entirely different playing field.
Then,
Dispatch to Kenda.
Go for Kenda.
Yes, we've located the Nixon brothers' vehicle. It was abandoned in Nebraska.
From the Nebraska State Highway Patrol have found the vehicle wanted in the murder case. It is abandoned a short distance from their hometown. It's obvious to me that they got in touch with their family. So now it's time to call their mother.
Yes. Can I speak with the Mrs. Nixon?
Yes, this is Mrs. Nixon.
We talked with their mother, really telling her how important it was for her sons to turn themselves in because they were in the computer considered armed and dangerous.
Have you seen them lately?
We've heard they're up your way.
Well, I don't really know where they are right now.
The hopes were that that message would get conveyed to the boys and that they should surrender themselves to police so that nothing would happen to them.
Mothers love their children no matter what they've done. And you play on the emotion of mom to get who you want off the street.
If you could get in touch with them, Mrs. Nixon, we'd appreciate it.
Like any mother, she was concerned for her boys.
Yeah, I'll let you know, Detective, if I hear from them.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Nixon.
Bye-bye.
And she didn't want them to end up in a shootout out on the roadside with police trying to arrest them.
within the hour,
Oh, shoot. Oh, we surrender.
Ted and Lance Nixon walk into their local police department.
Guys, have a seat over here.
The desk officer basically ran their names in the system, and they were placed under arrest.
I, of course, want to interrogate them. So Skip Arms is sent to Nebraska.
Officer, Detective Skip Arms from the Colorado Springs Police Department.
Yeah.
I believe you have a Ted and Lance Nixon for me.
Yeah, give me just a second. I'll get them for you.
Sure.
Here they are.
You can take us back to Colorado, but we ain't got nothing to say.
Okay, let's go.
We were certainly disappointed, and it is kind of frustrating, but you have to acknowledge that that is their right, not to talk.
But when Kenda picks them up at the Colorado Springs airport, the brothers seem to have a change of heart.
Can I ask you a question about my case?
It's very hard for people to stay quiet. It is not uncommon for people who have been on a long plane trip to start to get comfortable and start to make statements.
I mean, if we felt threatened or that our lives were in danger, what if someone had a weapon? It could be considered self-defense, right?
You guys invoked your right to remain silent.
Given this circumstance, I cannot respond. This is a spontaneous statement made by the arrestee. In the law, it's referred to as re justi, a Latin phrase that ultimately means spontaneous remark. That's what he's done.
However, given that, if the suspect continues to talk and it's not at your direction, there's no obligation to tell them to be quiet. And so we will sit back and listen to anything they have to say, and that's perfectly legal.
Can I just tell you my side of the story, and then you can tell me if it's self-defense?
You're free to say whatever you want.
Suddenly, things are getting very interesting. We are now in a position where we have the Nixon brothers under arrest for first-degree murder. We did not get the interrogation I wanted. But what we did get is that their argument for their defense is self-defense.
Lance Nixon continues to volunteer details of what he claims happened in Johnny's apartment.
I mean, we were nice, you know, we weren't pushy. We just went over there to get our guitar and amp back. But his brother was there, and he was just crazy. He pulled a knife on us. So we didn't have a choice. Ted had to shoot him.
What he's saying makes no sense. After Johnny pulled the knife, and after he was shot, he put the knife back in the scabbard and locked it down with a snap cover.
Are you gonna say anything?
I'm going to invoke my right to remain silent. Let's go.
Kenda may not be getting the full story, but there's one important detail that's been straightened out.
I wasn't sure who pulled the trigger, and Lance just handed me that in a silver platter. Ted had to shoot him because he had a knife. So Ted is the shooter, not Lance.
Now, all Kenda needs is for a witness to confirm or deny if Lance and Ted are justified in claiming self-defense.
Ralph Spencer goes into the apartment with the Nixon brothers. So that's why it was important to get his version of events.
But Ralph Spencer isn't talking. So before Kenda can get him to open up, he needs some help from Johnny's roommate, Paul Chappelle.
Okay, Paul. I know it was quick the night you saw those guys at the apartment, but I still need you to look at the photos.
We brought in Mr. Chappelle to look at a photo lineup that contained a picture of Ralph Spencer.
That's him.
In less than 2 seconds, he put his finger on it and said, "That's him right there."
You sure?
I'm certain he was just standing there, but that's him.
Okay, good.
All right, thanks for coming in.
No problem.
Once Paul was able to identify Ralph as being the third person there, we figure we have leverage now to really get him to talk as to what happened in the apartment.
See. You've been identified by a witness as being in Johnny's apartment the night he was killed. It's time to talk, Mr. Spencer.
Ralph reacts like, "Oh, God, they know everything." "Yeah, we kind of do, Ralph."
I had no clue those fools were going to do that. I didn't even know Ted had a gun until he pulled it out of his back pocket.
Tell me what happened.
As Ralph continues, he begins to paint a detailed picture of the events leading up to Johnny Crawford's death.
Ted and Lance were telling me about this deal that went bad, and they were asking me for some help. They were going to go back to this apartment where the deal was made.
What the hell do you guys want?
Where's Harvey?
I don't know. I haven't seen him for a few days. Even if I did know, I wouldn't tell you.
Ralph insists he just stood and watched while the Nixons argued.
See our amp. Where's our guitar?
I don't know. Maybe Harvey has it.
So where's Harvey?
You guys deaf? Said I didn't know.
Reading between the lines with Ralph's story, Johnny's being a little 19-year-old smartass. He didn't realize how serious this is.
This kid's talking smack, and it's making Ted and Lance even more crazy.
Were there any weapons out at this point?
Just a small knife on the table.
Ralph says that Lance sees the knife sitting in a sheath with it snapped over on the table next to the chair, and Lance picked it up and said,
"Mr. Tough Guy here's got a knife."
Okay, it's not even my knife, dude, all right? Calm down.
You gonna tell us where Harvey is or not?
Oh, man, you think you're such badasses.
Ralph says he sees Ted reach in the back pocket of his jeans with his right hand, and he pulls out a small pistol.
What the hell, Ted? Jesus!
Bud gets up to try to help his friend, Ralph says.
Sit down! Or you're next.
And Ted points the gun at his face.
All right, let's just get the amp and get out of here.
Honestly, I didn't know what the hell to do. I just wanted to get out of there. They went one way, I went the other.
Where'd you go?
I just took off to the Candlelight Bar. I sat there and I drank and I drank and I drank, just trying to get it out of my head.
Ralph's story makes perfect sense. It fits with the physical evidence. It fits with the emotion that you find in these violent crimes committed by young people. He was there for the intimidation factor and had no knowledge of what was going to transpire.
Ralph, I'm going to release you without charges. You're free to go.
He shook my hand with both his hands. Thank you so much. Goodbye, Ralph. Thank you for being honest.
While Ralph walks away a free man, the Nixon brothers meet a different fate.
After several months of court proceedings, Ted Nixon pled guilty to second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 14 years in the Colorado State Penitentiary. Lance Nixon was allowed to plead to a lesser charge of accessory to a crime because he didn't know what his brother was going to do when they went to the apartment.
We'll never really know what caused Ted to snap. They didn't know Johnny. I mean, it wasn't like they had a beef with him. Why would you do something like that?
What are the odds? Two sets of brothers, one set from Nebraska, one set from West Virginia, flitting around the country, getting involved in various schemes, and a death results from all of this. And what has been gained? Certainly nothing. And what has been lost? A 19-year-old life that never saw 20.
It starts with a sound no one remembers hearing, because no one was listening closely enough that night. A low winter wind scraping along the curb of a quiet New York block, January 1995, streetlights flickering like tired eyes, and somewhere between the glow and the dark a life slipping out of alignment with the city that never stops moving. Because this is New York and people disappear here without the city ever slowing down, without the subway missing a beat, without the papers screaming, until it is already too late to matter. The call comes in just after midnight, vague, confused, a body reported near a parked sedan, engine cold, hazard lights off, the kind of call dispatch hears dozens of times a week, the kind that doesn't yet carry the weight of a cold case, the kind that only later will feel like the first line of a headline written years too early. The scene is ordinary in the way that later becomes unbearable. A four-door car pulled tight against the curb. Driver's side window cracked an inch. No sign of forced entry. No skid marks. No broken glass glittering on the asphalt. Inside, slumped forward, a man in his early 30s, jacket still zipped, wallet still in his pocket, keys still in the ignition like he meant to be back any second. One gunshot wound. Clean. Precise, close range, the kind of wound that tells detectives this wasn't chaos. This wasn't panic. This was intention. The street is sealed off, yellow tape fluttering, neighbors watching from behind curtains, the unspoken rule of the city in full effect. See everything, say nothing. By morning the name is out. Local, unremarkable, a job that paid the bills, a life stitched together with routines. The kind of man whose face blends into a crowd, whose absence will be felt sharply by a few and barely registered by anyone else. The tabloids run a short piece on page 6. One paragraph. No photo. Man found dead in car. The word cold case does not appear yet. It never does at first. Detectives walk the block again in daylight, boots scuffing old snow and cigarette butts, trying to read a story written in footprints already erased. They knock on doors. A woman across the street heard something, maybe, she's not sure. Could have been a car backfiring. Could have been kids. Could have been nothing at all. A bodega owner down the corner remembers the car parked earlier in the evening. Doesn't remember when. Doesn't remember seeing anyone inside. Memory in this city is unreliable. Too much noise. Too many nights like this one. The victim's last hours are reconstructed the only way they ever are. Through receipts, phone logs, half-remembered conversations. Dinner with a coworker. A call placed just before 10. No voicemail left behind. No signs of distress. No known enemies. No debts that raise alarms. His apartment shows no signs of struggle. No missing items. No explanation waiting patiently on the kitchen table. It is as if he stepped out of his life and into a blank space the city provided without asking why. The gun is never found. No shell casing either, which bothers the detectives more than they admit out loud. Someone knew what they were doing. Someone took their time. Someone didn't panic. That detail sticks, lingering like a bad taste, because crimes of passion leave messes, and this scene is almost sterile. The word execution starts appearing in internal notes, then disappears again. Too dramatic, too definitive, not enough proof. New York in the 90s is busy with louder violence, bloodier stories, bodies that fall into patterns detectives recognize instantly. This one doesn't fit neatly, and what doesn't fit is easy to set aside. Weeks pass. Leads dry up. The coworker is cleared. The ex-girlfriend cries in an interrogation room and tells the same story 3 times without changing a word. Phone records reveal nothing but ordinary life. A neighbor swears she saw a different car idling nearby, but can't describe it beyond dark, which in New York might as well mean invisible. The case file thickens with paper and thins with hope. Somewhere in the middle of it all, a detective writes a line that will later feel like prophecy. No clear motive at this time. The community grows uneasy in that quiet, unfocused way that never quite becomes fear. There is no suspect to whisper about, no warning to repeat to children, no clear lesson to be learned. People lock their doors a little earlier. They look twice at parked cars with engines running. Then life moves on. It always does. The city does not pause for unanswered questions. By the end of the first year, the case is officially labeled inactive. Not closed, not solved, just waiting. The file is boxed and shelved, its spine marked with a date that already feels like another era. Cold case. 2 words that sound clinical until you realize they mean time has passed without mercy. That they mean evidence degrading, witnesses forgetting, truths slipping out of reach while everyone pretends that patience is a strategy. The family keeps asking questions. They sit in small offices under fluorescent lights and listen to careful language, promises shaped to manage expectations, not outcomes. Detectives rotate. New faces skim old reports, circle the same unanswered lines, nod at the same photos. Each one believes, briefly, that fresh eyes might catch what others missed. Each one eventually runs into the same wall. No weapon, no suspect, no motive, just a man dead in a car on a street that refuses to remember him. Rumors surface and vanish. Possible robbery gone wrong, except nothing was taken. A drug angle, except toxicology comes back clean. A personal dispute, except no one can name the other person in the room. Every theory collapses under its own weight. The city shrugs. Another unsolved murder joins the thousands that form a shadow archive beneath the skyline. Cases that linger like unanswered phone calls ringing forever in empty rooms. Years slide into decades. Technology changes. The streets look different. Buildings are renovated, repainted, replaced. The block where it happened is quieter now, safer. The kind of place real estate ads call up and coming. New residents walk past the exact spot without knowing what it once held, without feeling the echo of that night pressing up through the concrete. The case survives only in databases, in brittle photographs, in a box that smells faintly of dust and old coffee. And yet the unease never fully dissipates, because unresolved violence has a way of radiating outward, long after the headlines fade. It lives in the family's unanswered questions. It lives in the detectives who still remember the precision of the wound, the missing shell casing, the calmness implied by every detail. It lives in the knowledge that someone walked away into the city that night and blended in perfectly, never rushing, never looking back, knowing there would be no immediate chase, no sirens tearing through the dark. Cold case. New York, 1995. Words that sit together uneasily, heavy with implication. A murder that refuses to explain itself. A city that swallowed the answer whole. And somewhere, buried under years of noise and movement, the truth waits, silent, patient, unchanged by time, daring anyone to notice what everyone else missed. Time does not solve anything on its own. It only rearranges the silence. And by the late 90s, the silence around the case has settled into something heavy, something institutional, a weight carried by filing cabinets and database entries rather than active minds. Because detectives move on, units reshuffle, priorities shift, and the murder of one man in a parked car becomes a statistic buried under louder crimes that demand attention now, not memories from 4 winters ago. But the city remembers in fragments, in habits, in the way certain streets never quite feel neutral again, and the case refuses to disappear entirely, lingering at the edges of conversations, resurfacing whenever someone new flips open the file and pauses a second longer than expected on the photographs. The photographs are always the same: the car at the curb, the angle of the body, the clean entry wound. No chaos, no struggle. A scene that feels staged not for spectacle but for efficiency. That detail continues to gnaw because efficiency suggests familiarity, and familiarity suggests proximity, and proximity suggests a connection no one has been able to prove. The victim was not wealthy, not powerful, not notorious. He did not live the kind of life that attracts professional killers. And yet the killing itself carries the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and exactly how much time they had. In 1999, a detective with a reputation for stubbornness pulls the file from storage and starts over, not because of new evidence, but because something about the case bothers him in a way he can't articulate. He reads every report in order, then reads them again out of order, trying to break the narrative that has already failed once. He notices patterns that are not patterns at all, coincidences that crumble under scrutiny, assumptions that hardened into facts simply because no one challenged them early enough. He circles the timeline, narrowing it down to minutes, not hours, forcing the night to slow down in a way it never did the first time. The victim's final phone call becomes an obsession. No recording, just a number, landline, payphone, disconnected now. The person on the other end never came forward. They were never identified. The detective tracks down the building where the call was made, interviews tenants who barely remember living there, let alone a specific night years ago. A man recalls seeing someone waiting near the payphones often, lingering without using them, watching the street instead. Another shrugs and says people waited there all the time. In New York, loitering is not suspicious. It is background noise. The car itself is examined again with newer techniques, but newer does not mean miraculous. Fibers tell familiar stories. Prints are partial, smudged, inconclusive. No foreign DNA. No gift from the future waiting patiently in the upholstery. The absence of evidence becomes its own presence, pressing in, shaping every theory. Whoever did this left almost nothing behind, and that restraint feels intentional in a way that keeps the case from resting comfortably as random violence. The family grows older alongside the investigation, their grief evolving into something sharper, more brittle, shaped by years of unanswered questions. They clip articles whenever the words cold case appear, even when the story has nothing to do with this one. They attend memorials and anniversaries and listen politely to officials who promise renewed efforts, knowing how easily those promises fade once the cameras are gone. For them, time does not dull the loss. It sharpens it, carving away distractions until only the absence remains. The community barely remembers. Ask around and you get fragments, half-stories, wrong details stitched together by rumor. Someone insists it was a robbery. Someone else swears it was gang-related. Someone heard there was a suspect who fled the state. None of it holds up. None of it ever did. The truth has been replaced by whatever explanation makes the unanswered easier to live with, because mystery is uncomfortable, and certainty, even false certainty, is easier to carry. By the early 2000s, technology reshapes policing in ways that promise clarity. But old cases do not always benefit. Databases grow faster than insights. Information multiplies without meaning. The case is digitized, cross-referenced, flagged, but still there is nothing to anchor it, nothing that points clearly in one direction. It floats in a sea of data, just another unsolved homicide among thousands, its uniqueness diluted by sheer volume. And yet, certain details refuse to fade. The missing shell casing, the lack of defensive wounds, the victim's posture, as if he never saw it coming. These details whisper of trust, or at least of familiarity, and that whisper grows louder the longer the case remains unresolved. Strangers do not usually get that close without resistance. Strangers do not usually leave scenes this clean. Somewhere between those assumptions, a theory begins to form and dissolve repeatedly, never quite solid enough to present, never weak enough to abandon. A former coworker is re-interviewed, then interviewed again years later, his answers consistent but his demeanor changed, older, wearier, less guarded. He talks about office politics that once seemed trivial, about arguments that felt heated at the time but now feel insignificant. Nothing rises to the level of motive. No threats, no grudges that escalate to murder. The detective watches closely for cracks, but there are none. If there is guilt here, it is well hidden or entirely absent. The neighborhood changes hands. New families, new faces. The old bodega is replaced by a cafe with exposed brick and chalkboard menus. The past is scrubbed clean, aestheticized, made safe. Only the case file preserves the street as it was, frozen in grainy photographs. A crime scene no one visits anymore except on paper. The city has moved on so completely that the murder now feels like a rumor even to those tasked with remembering it. Funding shifts. Units are dissolved. Cold case squads are assembled, dismantled, reassembled again under new leadership with new priorities. Each cycle brings a brief flare of attention, a press release, a cautious hope that this time something will break. Each cycle ends the same way, with the case returned to its shelf, heavier with annotations but no closer to resolution. And still, the question hangs unanswered, heavy and persistent. Why this man? Why this night? Why this precision? The longer the silence stretches, the more disturbing it becomes, because unsolved cases do not simply represent failures of investigation. They represent someone who succeeded, someone who walked away clean, confident that the city would absorb the act and move on, confident that time would work in their favor. Cold case. The words now feel less like a classification and more like a sentence, imposed not on the killer, but on everyone left behind. A future where certainty is always just out of reach. A story paused mid-breath, waiting for a detail, a mistake, a moment of human error that never comes. And as the years stack up, as faces age and memories erode, the case drifts further into the past. Not solved, not forgotten, but suspended in that uneasy space where answers should be and aren't. By the time the case crosses its 10th year, it has acquired a reputation inside the department, not as notorious, not as infamous, but as stubborn, the kind of file that resists resolution not through complexity but through absence, through a refusal to give investigators anything solid to grab onto. Younger detectives hear about it in passing, usually as a cautionary tale, a reminder that some murders do not unravel no matter how carefully you pull at the threads. Veterans mention it less often because they remember the early days too clearly, remember how reasonable it once seemed to believe an answer was right around the corner. The file is reopened quietly, without press releases or public statements, driven by a review initiative meant to identify cases that might benefit from fresh eyes rather than fresh evidence. The logic is simple. People make assumptions early, and those assumptions calcify. Break them apart and maybe something new appears. The team assigned to the review works methodically, stripping the case down to its bones, pretending they know nothing, forcing themselves to justify every conclusion that once felt obvious. They start with the timeline again, but this time they compress it further, mapping not just where the victim was, but where everyone around him could have been. Who was home? Who was working late? Who had access to the street at that exact window of time? The problem becomes immediately clear. In New York, access is almost universal. Anyone can be anywhere. The city is porous in ways that defeat neat theories. Attention shifts to the car not as a crime scene but as a decision. Why here? Why parked? Why the driver's side? The victim was not carjacked. He was not dragged from the vehicle. He was seated, stationary, vulnerable. Someone approached him while he was already stopped, which suggests either coincidence or arrangement. Coincidence feels less likely with every passing year. Arrangement, however, raises questions no one has been able to answer. Who would he meet this way? And why in his car? Investigators re-examine his routines with a sharper eye, looking not for drama, but for deviations so small they might have been overlooked. A coffee shop visited irregularly. a route taken only on certain nights, a habit of making calls from payphones even when he had access to a phone at home. That detail, once dismissed as inconsequential, starts to feel heavier. Payphones imply privacy, secrecy, a desire not to be overheard. But secrecy alone is not motive. It is merely atmosphere. A name surfaces briefly, then sinks again, mentioned once in an old notebook, never followed up with urgency. An acquaintance, not a friend, not an enemy. Someone connected through a side channel of the victim's life, a place where work and personal boundaries blurred slightly. The team tracks the name down only to find a trail gone cold years ago. Moved out of state, new job, new family, no criminal record worth mentioning, no obvious reason to revisit the past. Interviews are conducted anyway, polite, careful, framed as routine. The responses are calm, measured, unremarkable. No visible fear, no defensiveness, just distance. The kind of distance time creates naturally and convincingly. Nothing in the answers trips alarms. Nothing breaks the surface. If there is deception here, it is practiced enough to blend in with ordinary forgetfulness. The missing shell casing returns to the forefront of discussion, debated now with more technical nuance. Some argue it was deliberately removed. Others suggest it was never there to begin with, caught in clothing, deflected, lost in the dark. Each explanation carries different implications, but none lead directly to a suspect. The gun remains a ghost, its absence both conspicuous and unhelpful. Without it, the case lacks the forensic anchor that modern investigations lean on so heavily. As the review continues, frustration mounts, not explosively, but steadily, like pressure building in a sealed room. The investigators begin to understand why the case resisted earlier efforts. It does not collapse under scrutiny because there is nothing structurally wrong with the investigation itself. The work was solid. The follow-ups reasonable. The failure lies elsewhere, in the simple fact that whoever committed the murder made very few mistakes, and the ones they did make were swallowed by the city before anyone knew to look. The family is notified that the case is being reviewed again, a courtesy that carries its own emotional weight. Hope resurfaces cautiously, tempered by experience. They ask the same questions they have always asked, listen to the same careful language, the same assurances that everything possible is being done. They have learned to hear the subtext. That possibility has limits, and those limits were reached years ago. Outside the department, the case has become almost mythic in its obscurity, referenced occasionally in discussions about unsolved crimes, but never with enough detail to ignite public pressure. There is no iconic image, no chilling audio, no dramatic final moments captured on tape. Just a parked car and a quiet street. It is difficult to mobilize outrage around something so understated, so resistant to spectacle. The review team documents its findings meticulously, noting what cannot be excluded as carefully as what can. They conclude, again, that the crime was targeted, that the victim likely knew or at least recognized the person who approached him, that the encounter was brief, that the shooter left calmly. None of this is new. What is new is the growing sense that the answer may never arrive in the form investigators expect. No confession, no DNA hit, no dramatic breakthrough. If the truth emerges, it will likely do so sideways, through an unrelated event, a careless word, a chance encounter. As the review winds down, recommendations are filed, resources reallocated, attention redirected. The case remains open in the technical sense, but functionally dormant once more. Another cycle completed. Another attempt absorbed by the city's vast capacity for unresolved stories. And yet, the case does not feel finished. It never does. There is something about the stillness of that night, the precision of the act, the lack of narrative resolution that refuses closure. It lingers in the minds of those who have studied it too closely, a reminder that not every crime announces its meaning, that some truths remain intact precisely because no one ever forces them into the light. Cold Case, New York, 1995. The words have aged, but the mystery has not. It sits untouched by time, waiting not for effort, but for accident, for the unpredictable moment when the past collides with the present in a way no investigation can manufacture. Until then, the file stays where it is, heavy with everything it does not say, a quiet testament to the fact that some stories do not end. They simply stop being told out loud. The thing about unresolved violence is that it doesn't fade so much as it disperses, breaking into smaller pieces that lodge themselves in places no one thinks to check. And by the time the case enters its second decade, those pieces are scattered across old paperwork, retired memories, and institutional habits that quietly assume some answers will never come. New York has changed again by now, hardened and softened in different places, and the night of the murder feels increasingly distant. Like a black and white photograph everyone agrees is important, but no one studies closely anymore. A cold case unit takes another look, this time driven less by optimism and more by obligation. A periodic audit meant to ensure nothing has been missed that modern methods might illuminate. They do not expect miracles. They expect patterns, statistical context, a way to place the crime within a broader map of violence that might reveal something invisible in isolation. They compare it to other shootings from the same year, same borough, same weapon type. Most of those cases resolved quickly. Arrests made, motives named, arguments traced. This one stands apart not because it was more brutal, but because it was quieter. The analysts notice something subtle and unsettling. The murder does not align cleanly with known trends of the time. It is not connected to gang territory shifts, not tied to drug enforcement spikes, not linked to robberies escalating into shootings. It exists outside the usual frameworks, and that isolation becomes its defining characteristic. Crimes that do not fit patterns are harder to explain, and harder still to solve, because pattern recognition is how modern policing thinks. Attention turns briefly to geography. The exact location of the car is mapped again, overlaid with changes to traffic flow, lighting, sightlines. In 1995, the street was dimmer, narrower, more forgiving to someone who wanted to disappear quickly. An alley nearby no longer exists. A vacant lot has become a condominium. Escape routes that once made sense have been erased physically, even as they remain theoretically possible on paper. The city has edited the crime scene out of existence. A retired detective is interviewed, someone who worked the case early on and now has little reason to protect institutional narratives. He remembers the night clearly, remembers how unremarkable it felt at first, how no one raised their voice or rushed their steps. He remembers thinking it would be solved within days. When asked what still bothers him, he doesn't hesitate. The victim's calm, not fear, not surprise, calm, as if the presence of another person by his car did not register as danger until it was too late. That detail reframes everything, because calm implies expectation. It suggests the victim did not perceive the encounter as threatening, at least not immediately, which brings the investigation back again and again to the same uncomfortable conclusion. Whoever approached that car was not a stranger in the usual sense. They were someone who belonged in that moment, someone whose presence did not trigger alarm. The unit revisits social connections that once seemed too thin to matter. Casual acquaintances, peripheral figures, people who existed just outside the victim's inner circle. These are the hardest relationships to interrogate because they leave the fewest records and the weakest emotional trails. They are easy to forget and difficult to reconstruct years later. Names are cross-checked against other cases, other timelines, other cities. Nothing lights up. No collisions. No echoes. Public interest flickers briefly when a local paper runs a retrospective on unsolved murders from the 90s. The case mentioned in a column that trades depth for breadth. The headline uses the words cold case and mystery, but the article offers no new information, just a reminder that the question still exists. Tips come in anyway. They always do. A man who claims to have heard something in a bar years ago. A woman convinced her ex-husband once knew more than he admitted. None of it survives verification. Memory degrades unevenly, and time turns certainty into suggestion. Inside the department, there is an unspoken hierarchy of solvability, and this case has slipped near the bottom. Not because it lacks importance, but because it lacks leverage. No living witnesses who haven't already been questioned. No physical evidence waiting for new technology. no obvious suspect aging into guilt. It becomes a file that investigators respect rather than pursue, a quiet acknowledgement that effort does not always correlate with outcome. The family watches these developments from a distance, learning about them indirectly, through brief updates that convey motion without progress. They have learned to read between the lines, to hear what is not being said. Each renewed look brings a momentary lift, followed by the familiar descent into uncertainty. They exist now in a long aftermath, where the initial shock has been replaced by endurance, by the daily discipline of carrying an unanswered loss. What lingers most is not anger, but confusion. The absence of motive is harder to live with than the absence of a suspect. Motive gives shape to tragedy. It makes violence comprehensible, even if it does not make it acceptable. Here, there is only speculation, and speculation offers no relief. The victim's life, viewed in hindsight, does not point toward an ending like this, and that disconnect continues to haunt those who study the case. As years accumulate, the case acquires a strange dual existence. Officially, it is open, reviewed periodically, never forgotten entirely. Culturally, it is invisible, overshadowed by crimes with clearer narratives, more dramatic arcs. It exists in a quiet space between those worlds, acknowledged but not engaged, known but not understood. Detectives who encounter the file for the first time often react the same way. They expect a missing piece, something obvious everyone else overlooked. They flip pages faster at first, then slower still until the realization settles in that the absence itself is the point. There is no hidden page, no dramatic omission, just a night that ended too cleanly, too efficiently, and a city that absorbed it without leaving a trace. The case is returned to storage once more, its edges frayed from handling, its contents unchanged. Another review completed, another decade approaching. The language used to describe it grows increasingly careful, almost philosophical. Some cases, it is said, resist resolution not because of failure but because of circumstance, because timing matters, because chance matters, because not every truth leaves a footprint. Cold case. The words feel colder now, heavier, less procedural. They describe not just the state of the investigation, but the emotional temperature surrounding it. A chill that never fully lifts. A reminder that beneath the city's constant motion lies a layer of stories that remain unfinished, waiting for something unpredictable to disturb the surface. And somewhere within that waiting, the possibility remains, faint but persistent, that the answer will not come from reinvestigation or review, but from intrusion, from an unrelated moment when the past forces itself into the present without permission. Until then, the night in 1995 stays exactly where it is, intact, unresolved, holding its secrets as tightly as the city that learned long ago how to keep moving without them. By the mid-2000s, the case has outlived several careers, and that alone changes the way it is perceived, because unresolved murders are not just puzzles, they are liabilities, reminders of limits that institutions prefer not to advertise. The file is still there, still technically open, but it now carries a faint aura of inevitability, the unspoken assumption that whatever answer exists has already slipped past the moment when it could be captured cleanly. Even so, the case refuses to disappear completely, resurfacing whenever policy shifts or leadership changes create brief windows where old questions are allowed back into the room. A new supervisor orders a broad re-interview strategy, not because there is reason to believe witnesses lied, but because time changes people, and people sometimes say different things once the urgency is gone. Former neighbors are tracked down through outdated addresses and forwarded mail. Some have moved across the country. Some have died. Those who remain struggle to reconstruct a night that has been overwritten by hundreds of others. Their recollections are softer now, less precise, shaped as much by what they have been told over the years as by what they actually experienced. One neighbor recalls a figure standing near the car, posture relaxed, hands visible, no sense of threat. Another remembers nothing at all and is unsettled by the expectation that they should. A third insists there was an argument, voices raised briefly, but cannot remember the words or even how many people were there. The statements contradict each other in ways that cannot be resolved, not because anyone is lying, but because memory is not a recording device. It is a story we tell ourselves, and stories change. The investigators catalog these accounts carefully, knowing full well they will not hold up in court, knowing they may not even reflect reality. What matters is not their accuracy, but the emotional texture they add. Calm, familiarity, stillness. Those themes repeat, echoing across years of retelling, and the repetition itself becomes data. It suggests that whatever happened unfolded without chaos, without urgency, without the kind of disorder that leaves marks. Attention shifts again to the victim's inner life, not in search of scandal, but in search of context. Diaries are reread. Old emails are recovered from obsolete systems. Notes scribbled on scraps of paper are analyzed for tone rather than content. The picture that emerges is not of a man in trouble, but of a man compartmentalizing, keeping certain aspects of his life neatly separated. Work here, family there, private conversations conducted away from familiar ears. None of it is illegal. None of it is inherently dangerous. But separation creates blind spots, and blind spots are where risk hides. A former colleague mentions, almost casually, that the victim preferred to handle sensitive conversations in person or from payphones, even when it was inconvenient. At the time, it was dismissed as a quirk, a habit from another era. Now it reads differently, like a deliberate choice. The question becomes not what he was hiding, but from whom and why. The investigators consider, briefly, whether the victim himself was not the target in the way they have assumed. Whether the shooting was meant as a message, misdirected or misunderstood. But messages usually require audiences, and this crime had none. No note, no follow-up, no ripple effects. If it was a message, it was delivered into a void. As the years pass, the case accumulates a strange emotional gravity. Detectives speak about it in lowered tones, as if respect alone might coax an answer into existence. It becomes a reference point in training sessions, an example of how little a crime can leave behind. It also becomes a private benchmark, a case some officers measure themselves against, wondering whether they would have done anything differently if they had been there at the beginning. The family, meanwhile, lives with the paradox of hope. They want resolution, but they fear what resolution might reveal. Time has allowed them to imagine many possible endings, some more bearable than others. The truth, whatever it is, may not align with the version they have learned to live with. And yet, not knowing remains its own form of cruelty, a suspended state that offers no finality. Outside the official process, the city continues to generate theories, each one reflecting more about the speaker than the case itself. Some frame it as random because randomness is easier to accept than intention. Others insist it must have been personal, because personal violence feels narratively satisfying. None of these stories change the facts. They simply fill the silence temporarily. At one point, a tip surfaces involving a man arrested years later on an unrelated weapons charge, someone who allegedly bragged while intoxicated about doing something once that never caught up to him. The claim is vague, uncorroborated, impossible to place in time. Investigators chase it anyway, because cold cases feed on fragments. The man denies it, laughs it off, and nothing connects him to the victim. The lead collapses under scrutiny, another false summit on a long climb. The case is updated again, notes appended, theories refined, but the core remains unchanged. A man shot once, in his car on a quiet street. No witnesses who can say what mattered. No evidence that speaks. Just an accumulation of impressions pointing toward familiarity without naming it. As the decade draws to a close, the case feels older than its years, weighed down by repetition and restraint. It has been looked at from every angle that seems reasonable and some that do not. What remains is not a lack of effort, but a lack of disruption. Nothing has intruded from the outside to break the equilibrium of not knowing. And so the file rests again, heavier now with interpretation than with fact, its pages marked by the fingerprints of those who have handled it, all searching for the same thing, all leaving empty-handed. Cold case is no longer just a label. It is the atmosphere surrounding the crime, a chill that persists not because the night was cold, but because time itself has failed to warm the truth into view. What eventually unsettles the case again is not a breakthrough, but a disturbance, the kind that doesn't announce itself as important until much later, when someone looks back and realizes the air shifted slightly that day. It begins with a routine audit of evidence storage, a bureaucratic exercise meant to account for what exists rather than discover what doesn't. And in the process, an old inventory list is compared against a newer digital record. The comparison reveals nothing dramatic. No missing weapon, no mislabeled bag, just a note, handwritten, barely legible, referencing a follow-up that never appears in the file. The note concerns a traffic stop conducted in the same precinct weeks after the murder, flagged at the time as unrelated. A routine interaction, a vehicle pulled over for a minor infraction. No arrest, no charges. The kind of thing that happens thousands of times a day and evaporates almost immediately. The mention is brief, almost dismissive, and for years it has sat unnoticed, too vague to trigger curiosity, too incomplete to suggest relevance. A detective pauses on it now, not because it screams importance, but because it doesn't belong anywhere else. Cold cases sharpen sensitivity to anomalies. Anything out of place, anything unexplained, draws attention by default. The detective searches for the corresponding report. Takes time. Old systems, archived backups, formats no longer supported. Eventually, the record surfaces, stripped of narrative, reduced to fields and timestamps. The stop occurred late at night. Different street, different circumstances. The driver was cooperative. The stop lasted less than 10 minutes. No citations issued. No follow-up required. On its face, it means nothing. But one detail stands out, small and easily overlooked. The officer noted that the driver appeared unusually calm, even relaxed, given the late hour and the reason for the stop. It's a subjective observation, not evidence, but it echoes something that has haunted the case from the beginning. Calm. The detective does not assume a connection. That would be irresponsible. Instead, they note the overlap in timing, the proximity in geography, the shared sense of composure that seems oddly specific. They add a question mark in the margin. In cold cases, question marks matter more than conclusions. The officer who conducted the stop is located, now retired, living several states away. When contacted, he is surprised anyone remembers the incident at all. It was unremarkable, he says. Nothing about it stuck with him. When pressed about the note, he shrugs. It was just an impression, he explains. Some people get nervous. Some don't. This driver didn't. That's all. He does not recall the person's face. He does not remember the car beyond its color. Time has smoothed everything into generalities. Still, the stop is logged, cross-referenced, compared against other records from that period. The driver's name appears elsewhere, faintly, not in connection with the murder, but in connection with the victim's extended network. Not close, not direct, 2 degrees removed. The kind of connection that would never have raised suspicion on its own. The kind of overlap that exists everywhere in a city this size. The detective resists the urge to lean into it too quickly. Patterns are seductive, especially in cases starved of them. Confirmation bias is a luxury cold cases cannot afford. The name is set aside, neither elevated nor dismissed, placed in a category reserved for possibilities that are not yet accusations. As this thread is pulled gently, others begin to quiver. The driver lived, at the time, within a reasonable distance of the crime scene. Not next door, not across town. Close enough to make presence plausible without being conspicuous. Employment records show a job with irregular hours, providing opportunity without routine. None of this proves anything. It merely removes excuses. The investigation, cautious but alert, expands outward from this point, not chasing the individual but the context around them. Who they knew, where they spent time, whether their paths crossed the victims in ways not previously mapped. Old phone books are consulted, obsolete directories unearthed. The work feels archaeological, slow, and speculative, but it produces a clearer picture of the social landscape as it once existed. No one remembers a conflict. No one recalls tension. If the two men knew each other, it was quietly, without drama, without witnesses who would later frame it as significant. That quietness is consistent with everything else about the case, and that consistency is both reassuring and disturbing. The possibility of coincidence remains strong. New York is dense. Lives intersect constantly without meaning. The department has seen enough false trails born of proximity to treat coincidence with respect. Still, the fact that this detail survived unnoticed for so long gives it weight. It suggests the case may not be missing evidence so much as misreading it. The family is not informed yet, not because investigators doubt their right to know, but because nothing has solidified into something that can be communicated responsibly. Cold cases teach patience in brutal ways. Premature hope can be as damaging as despair. Internally, the case begins to shift tone, not toward optimism but toward attention. People linger over the file again. Conversations extend past scheduled meetings. Questions are asked that have not been asked in years. The case is no longer dormant. It is awake, but not yet moving. What emerges most clearly is not a suspect, but a renewed awareness of how close the answer may have always been. Not hidden in dramatic revelations or buried evidence, but in ordinary interactions, in moments dismissed as routine, in notes written quickly and forgotten. The realization is unsettling because it reframes failure not as a lack of tools, but as a lack of perspective. The night in 1995 begins to feel less like an isolated event and more like part of a longer, quieter sequence, one that did not announce itself as dangerous until it was already over. The car, the street, the calm, the absence of urgency. All of it aligns with the idea that the most consequential moments often arrive disguised as nothing at all. Cold case files are heavy not because of what they contain, but because of what they imply. That answers can exist without revealing themselves. That truth can sit in plain sight, unrecognized, for years. As the investigation tentatively reorients itself around this overlooked detail, no one dares to say the word breakthrough. They have learned better than that. For now, there is only motion, careful and deliberate, guided by restraint rather than excitement. A recognition that something has shifted, subtly but undeniably, and that the past, long silent, may finally be pressing back, not with a confession or a confession-shaped clue, but with the quiet insistence that it was never as unknowable as everyone believed. Once attention turns toward the overlooked, the case begins to change shape, not dramatically, not yet, but in the way pressure redistributes when a sealed container is nudged instead of shaken. Investigators revisit the years immediately following the murder with a narrower lens, asking not who stood out, but who blended in too well. The routine traffic stop, once an administrative footnote, now acts like a hinge, subtle but structural, connecting two moments that were never meant to be compared. The name associated with the stop is run again, this time not as a suspect, but as a reference point. Employment history, residential moves, financial records, nothing explosive surfaces. No arrests, no sudden changes that scream guilt. The life trajectory is unremarkable, and that is precisely what keeps it from being dismissed. People who commit impulsive violence often leave disorder behind them. People who plan tend to leave continuity. The detectives notice something else, something that did not register the first dozen times they reviewed the case. The victim's car was parked in a spot that offered limited visibility from the main intersection, but clear sight lines toward the side street. It is the kind of place someone chooses when they want privacy without isolation. It suggests a meeting that required discretion, but not secrecy. A conversation, perhaps. An exchange of words rather than objects. The implication is quiet, but it reshapes the scene. They overlay the location of the traffic stop with the victim's final route home, tracing possible paths not just on maps, but in time. The overlap is imperfect, but not impossible. The city allows for coincidence, but coincidence repeated too often begins to feel intentional. Still, nothing in this alignment proves a meeting occurred. It merely suggests opportunity. The case remains fragile, vulnerable to overinterpretation, and the detectives know it. They argue internally, pushing back against their own excitement. One insists they are building castles on sand. Another counters that sand is all this case has ever offered. The debate itself is a sign of life. Indifference has been replaced by tension, and tension, in cold cases, is a form of progress. They return again to the victim's final phone call, now armed with a different question. Not who called him, but why the call ended when it did. Records show it was brief, shorter than most of his other calls. Not rushed, but decisive. As if arrangements were made quickly, without the need for elaboration. As if both parties already understood the context. The building where the payphone once stood is visited again, though nothing remains of it now but renovated walls and new tenants who have never known the place as it was. Old maintenance records are pulled. The payphone serviced multiple nearby blocks. Anyone could have used it, but usage patterns suggest regulars, people who return to the same phone repeatedly. That pattern narrows the universe slightly, not enough to accuse, but enough to imagine familiarity. A former building manager, long retired, remembers a man who used that phone often, always late, always brief, never lingering after the call ended. The description is vague, but the habit stands out. It matches the victim's pattern. Could match many others as well. Memory again proves both helpful and treacherous, offering texture without precision. The investigators compile these fragments into a working theory, careful not to let it harden into belief. The theory is simple, almost boring. The victim agreed to meet someone he knew casually, someone who did not alarm him, someone who fit easily into the background of his life. The meeting took place in his car, chosen for convenience and discretion. Something went wrong, or something went exactly as planned. That last possibility is the one no one likes to voice. Because if the killing was planned, if the shooter approached calmly, spoke briefly, and acted decisively, then the case is not missing chaos or motive, but a single misjudgment made by the victim about who was safe. That realization shifts sympathy into tragedy, making the crime feel both more intimate and more cruel. The family is finally informed that the case has taken on new focus, though details are kept deliberately general. They have learned to temper their reactions, to protect themselves from emotional whiplash. They listen, ask careful questions, and thank the detectives for continuing to look. Gratitude has replaced expectation. Hope, when it appears, is tightly controlled. As this phase unfolds, the case draws a quiet kind of attention within the department. Not the kind that brings resources pouring in, but the kind that keeps people at their desks a little longer, rereading notes instead of filing them away. Conversations spill into hallways. Someone mentions a similar case from another precinct years ago, unsolved, vaguely comparable. The connection goes nowhere, but the act of searching matters. What becomes increasingly clear is that the truth, if it emerges, will not announce itself loudly. There will be no confession driven by guilt, no forgotten evidence suddenly speaking through new technology. If resolution comes, it will come through accumulation, through the slow tightening of context around a small number of facts that have always been there. The night in 1995 is reconstructed again, this time not as a sequence of actions, but as a sequence of expectations. The victim expected a conversation. He expected no danger. The other person expected compliance, proximity, a moment without witnesses. Those expectations align too cleanly to ignore. They form a negative space where motive might exist, even if its outline remains indistinct. Cold cases often fail because they are treated as puzzles to be solved rather than lives to be understood. This one resists puzzles. It demands empathy, not sympathy, an attempt to inhabit a moment rather than explain it. That demand is uncomfortable, because it forces investigators to acknowledge how little separates ordinary routines from irreversible outcomes. As Part 7 closes, the case stands at an uneasy threshold. Not solved, not stalled, balanced between possibility and restraint. The overlooked traffic stop has not transformed into a smoking gun, but it has done something arguably more important. It has reminded everyone involved that answers do not always hide in darkness. Sometimes they hide in plain sight, camouflaged as routine, waiting for someone patient enough or stubborn enough to look twice. The deeper the investigators move into the ordinary, the more unsettling the case becomes, because nothing about it demands urgency, and yet everything about it feels deliberate. The working theory remains fragile, built on inference rather than proof, and that fragility dictates the pace. No sudden moves, no confrontations, just observation, reconstruction, and the careful weighing of patterns that have survived this long precisely because they never drew attention to themselves. The name connected to the traffic stop is now treated as an axis rather than a target, a point around which other information is allowed to rotate. Old associates are identified, not questioned aggressively, but approached conversationally years later under the pretext of routine background verification. Most have little to say, lives moved on, details blurred, but a few recollections surface that complicate the picture in quiet ways. One former acquaintance recalls the man as reliable, measured, someone who disliked unpredictability. Another mentions his habit of keeping things clean, not in a moral sense but in a logistical one. No loose ends. No unnecessary risks. The comments are casual, not accusatory, but they align uncomfortably well with the nature of the crime. Planning, restraint, efficiency. None of this constitutes evidence, but cold cases often advance on alignment rather than discovery. The investigators resist labeling these traits as incriminating. Plenty of careful people never commit murder, but they note the absence of contradiction. No one remembers him as volatile. No one recalls threats or outbursts. If violence occurred, it would not have been impulsive. It would have been contained. The timeline is tightened once more, now incorporating the traffic stop as a temporal marker rather than a clue. The stop occurs within a window that does not contradict the murder's timing, but does not confirm involvement either. It simply exists alongside it, a parallel event that refuses to drift away. The detectives mark it as such a fixed point in a fluid narrative. Attention returns to the moment of approach. The shooter would have had to exit a vehicle or emerge from nearby without drawing notice. Witnesses remember no panic, no shouting, no rapid movement. The scene suggests a brief interaction that did not register as dangerous to anyone nearby. That detail narrows the psychological profile more than the physical one. Whoever did this understood how to appear non-threatening. A behavioral analyst is consulted not to profile a suspect, but to evaluate the interaction itself. The conclusion is cautious, stripped of drama. The encounter likely lasted less than a minute. The shooter controlled the conversation. The victim was not alarmed. The act was decisive and final. The shooter departed immediately, without haste. The analysis adds clarity without comfort. The investigators consider, briefly, whether the victim may have initiated the meeting under false assumptions, believing he held some form of leverage, some understanding that did not reflect reality. That possibility introduces a new dimension of vulnerability, one that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with miscalculation. Trust, even casual trust, becomes the most dangerous element in the story. As these ideas circulate internally, the case begins to feel less like an unsolved murder and more like a failure of perception, a moment when nothing seemed wrong until it was irreversibly wrong. That framing unsettles the team more than any theory involving chaos or rage. It suggests that the conditions for the crime were invisible because they were ordinary. The family senses a shift, even without details. Updates sound different now, less procedural, more careful. They ask fewer questions, choosing instead to listen, to measure tone rather than content. They have lived with this long enough to recognize when something has changed beneath the surface. Externally, nothing changes. There are no headlines, no leaks, no sudden interest. The city continues its rhythms, unaware that an old case has begun to breathe again. This invisibility protects the investigation, but it also reinforces a sobering truth. Justice, when it comes late, rarely announces itself in advance. The detectives review the possibility of confronting the individual connected to the traffic stop, but the consensus is unanimous. Not yet. There is no leverage, no contradiction to exploit. An interview now would generate nothing but rehearsed normalcy. The case requires more context before any move that might close doors permanently. Instead, they widen the lens slightly, looking at other routine interactions from that period that might carry similar weight. Parking tickets, minor complaints, incidental contacts that were dismissed as noise. The volume is overwhelming. For every overlooked detail, there are 100 dead ends. The work becomes an exercise in endurance. What sustains the effort is not confidence, but unease. The sense that the case has been misunderstood rather than neglected. That its silence is not emptiness, but compression. Years of assumptions pressing inward, concealing a shape that only emerges when pressure is applied evenly, patiently. The night in 1995 is now imagined not as an explosion of violence, but as a controlled interruption. A pause in routine that lasted seconds and altered everything. That framing strips the event of sensationalism and leaves behind something more disturbing. The idea that the most devastating acts can occur without spectacle, without warning, without leaving behind anything obvious to chase. As Part 8 settles, the investigation remains suspended between knowledge and proof. No arrests, no accusations. Just a narrowing field of understanding that refuses to resolve into certainty. The overlooked traffic stop still hovers at the edge of the story, neither confirming nor denying anything. A reminder that the smallest details often carry the greatest weight, but only after time has taught us how to see them. The case reaches a point where every step forward feels like a risk, not because the truth is fragile, but because it has waited so long that mishandling it now could send it retreating again into silence. Investigators move with a new kind of caution, aware that attention itself can alter behavior, and that the wrong move could harden a carefully preserved normalcy into permanent denial. Cold cases punish impatience more harshly than neglect. A decision is made to re-examine financial records from the mid-90s, not looking for large transfers or obvious debts, but for subtle irregularities, moments when money moved in ways that did not align perfectly with routine. Bank statements are pulled from archives, paper-heavy and incomplete, but enough remains to sketch patterns. The victim's finances are unremarkable, stable, predictable, no signs of desperation or windfall. That absence reinforces what has always been uncomfortable about the case. Nothing about his life suggests risk commensurate with the way he died. The focus shifts again, reluctantly, to the other side of the interaction. The man connected to the traffic stop shows similar financial normalcy. No unexplained gains. No sudden shifts in lifestyle. Whatever happened in 1995 did not produce visible profit. That realization narrows the field of motive further. If this was not about money, and not about chaos, what remains is control or prevention, or resolution of something that could not be allowed to continue. Investigators revisit the victim's professional life with that lens in mind, looking not for scandals, but for moments of friction, places where his role intersected with others in ways that could produce quiet conflict. He occupied a position that required discretion, that involved information more than authority. He knew things, but not things that should have made him powerful. Knowledge without leverage is dangerous in ways that are hard to articulate and harder to prove. A former colleague recalls an incident from months before the murder, something that once seemed trivial. A disagreement over access. A conversation that ended abruptly. No sreds. No escalation. Just a sense that boundaries had been tested and then quietly restored. At the time, it barely registered. In hindsight, it acquires weight not as motive but as context. Another example of how tension can exist without noise. The investigators struggle with the implications. If the murder was about preventing disclosure, silencing a problem before it became one, then its cleanliness makes sense. So does the lack of aftermath. Preventative acts are designed to leave nothing behind. They do not seek attention. They seek closure. But speculation has limits, and the team is careful not to drift too far from what can be supported. They document possibilities, not conclusions. Every theory is written in pencil, ready to be erased if contradicted. The discipline is exhausting but necessary. The idea of re-interviewing the individual linked to the traffic stop resurfaces, this time with more support. Not as a confrontation, but as a conversation framed around routine verification. Time has passed. People grow more relaxed. Details slip. Even silence can speak. The risk is acknowledged. So is the potential reward. Preparations are meticulous. Questions are drafted and redrafted, stripped of accusation, designed to elicit narrative rather than defense. The goal is not confession. It is inconsistency, a moment where the past and present fail to align cleanly. The interview, when it happens, is unremarkable on the surface. The man is cooperative, polite. His recollection of the 90s is hazy, as one would expect. He remembers the traffic stop only after being reminded, and even then only as an inconvenience. He does not remember where he was going or coming from that night. He has no reason to. Most people don't. What catches the investigator's attention is not what he says, but how he says it. Calm, controlled. No irritación. No curiosity about why these questions are being asked now, after so many years. He answers as if he anticipated the conversation, as if this possibility has always existed somewhere in the background of his life. Nothing in the interview crosses a legal threshold. Nothing can be challenged directly, but the absence of surprise is noted, quietly, among the team. Surprise is difficult to fake convincingly, and its absence can be as telling as its presence. Afterward, the investigators sit with the recording, listening again and again, not for words but for rhythm, for hesitation, for the subtle shifts that betray cognitive effort. They find nothing overt, just smoothness, continuity, a story that has aged without changing shape. The family is informed that an interview has taken place. They ask the question they have learned not to ask directly. Did it help? The answer is careful. Clarified some things. It did not answer everything. They nod, absorbing the ambiguity with practiced composure. As the case moves deeper into this phase, the weight of time becomes palpable. Every action feels belated. Every insight feels overdue. The investigators are acutely aware that even if they identify the truth, proving it may be impossible. Justice delayed has a way of eroding not just evidence but options. The night in 1995 is now viewed through the lens of prevention rather than reaction. A moment where something was stopped rather than started. That framing does not bring comfort. It deepens the unease because it implies intent that predates the crime, decisions made quietly long before the trigger was pulled. As Part 9 draws to a close, the case stands in a narrow corridor between suspicion and proof. The outlines are sharper than they have ever been, but the center remains hollow. The truth feels close enough to cast a shadow, but still too distant to touch. And in that space, the most dangerous thing of all persists, the possibility that the answer is known, and yet forever unreachable. By now, the case exists in a narrow band of time where every option feels compromised, because enough has been learned to make ignorance impossible, but not enough to justify action that cannot be taken back. The investigators feel the pressure not from supervisors or headlines, but from the simple awareness that they may be standing as close to the truth as they will ever get. In cold cases, proximity is not victory. It is tension. They begin to reconstruct not just what happened, but what did not happen afterward. No threats. No further violence connected to the victim's circle. No attempts to silence others. No ripple effects. That absence is no longer neutral. It suggests finality. Whatever problem existed was resolved completely in a single moment, and that resolution held. For decades, the implications are unsettling. Crimes that end problems tend to be deliberate. They are designed to close loops, not open them. The killer did not fear retaliation, did not anticipate investigation reaching them, did not feel the need to control the narrative afterward. That level of confidence is rare, and it narrows the psychological field further than any forensic test ever could. Investigators revisit the interview again, listening now with this framing in mind. The calmness no longer reads as neutrality. It reads as continuity, a life that did not fracture around a violent act. No visible before and after, no inflection point. If this man carries guilt, it has integrated seamlessly into his identity, indistinguishable from the rest of his history. That realization forces an uncomfortable acknowledgement. Some people do not unravel. The team debates escalation. Surveillance is discussed, then dismissed. There is nothing to surveil. The life is quiet, predictable, law-abiding. A confrontation without new evidence would achieve nothing but resistance. The legal thresholds are clear and they are not met. Cold cases do not bend rules simply because time has passed. Attention turns instead to corroboration, the search for one external detail that might tip the balance. Someone who noticed something unusual that night and never connected it to the murder. A document misfiled. A memory triggered by unrelated conversation. Investigators reach out discreetly to former associates again, this time asking broader questions, listening for emotional reactions rather than factual content. One person hesitates when the name is mentioned. Just a pause. A fraction of a second longer than expected. When asked why, they shrug it off, say they hadn't thought about him in years. The moment is logged, not because it proves anything, but because cold cases are built from moments like that. Micro-reactions. Unintended signals. The problem is that these signals cannot be translated into evidence. They only reinforce suspicion. The frustration sharpens, but it does not explode. These investigators are veterans of disappointment. What hurts more is the clarity of the shape they can now see, even as the center remains empty. They can outline the crime with increasing precision. They can explain how it happened, why it was efficient, why it left nothing behind. What they cannot do is prove who pulled the trigger. The family is brought in for a longer conversation, not to deliver news, but to manage expectations. The tone is different now, less procedural, more human. They are told that the investigation has reached a point where further progress may depend on something external, something unpredictable. A confession, a deathbed admission, a chance remark overheard by the wrong person. The family listens in silence. They have lived with unpredictability for decades. There is a moment in the meeting when one of them asks a question no one else has asked out loud. Do you think he knew who was going to kill him? The room stills. The answer, when it comes, is careful. They think he knew who he was meeting. Whether he understood the danger is impossible to say. The distinction matters, and it will never be resolved. That question lingers after the meeting ends, reshaping the way everyone involved thinks about the final seconds. Not as a shock, but as a miscalculation. A moment where familiarity was mistaken for safety. The tragedy deepens because it feels avoidable, and avoidance is the cruelest illusion of all. Internally, the case is flagged at its highest level of suspicion without crossing into accusation. It exists now in a kind of limbo, recognized but unresolved, heavy with implication. Investigators document everything meticulously, knowing that their notes may be all that remains if the case outlives them too. The city, indifferent as ever, offers no signal that it is ready to give up its secret. Streets have been repaved, buildings replaced. People who lived there in 1995 have scattered. The physical world has erased the crime so completely that only memory sustains it, and memory is unreliable, finite. As the investigation slows, not from lack of will but from lack of legal ground, a final truth settles in quietly. Solving a case and proving a case are not the same thing. Justice requires more than certainty. It requires demonstration, and demonstration requires time that has already been spent. The night in 1995 now feels frozen, not because it is unknowable, but because it is known too late. The pieces align. The behavior makes sense. The calmness has context. The silence has meaning. But meaning without proof is a private burden, not a public resolution. As Part 10 closes, the case hovers at the edge of its own ending, not with an arrest, not with closure, but with understanding that will never be spoken in court. The truth, whatever its final shape, feels present, almost tangible, and yet remains beyond reach, like a shadow cast by something standing just out of view, unmoving, unrepentant, and perfectly at ease with the passage of time. In the end, the case does not close so much as it settles, like dust after a disturbance. Everything still visible but nothing moving anymore. The investigators remain at their desks long after the official workday ends, not because there is something left to do, but because leaving feels like surrender, and surrender is difficult when the shape of the truth feels so close it almost casts warmth. Cold cases end this way more often than anyone admits, not with sirens or handcuffs, but with quiet acknowledgement. The final reports are written carefully, every word weighed, every implication restrained. Language becomes defensive, designed to survive scrutiny, to outlast the people who wrote it. Suspicions are framed as observations. Observations as patterns. Patterns as context. Nothing is declared. Nothing is accused. The file grows heavier one last time, not with answers but with understanding. The individual connected to the routine traffic stop continues his life uninterrupted. No charges. No headlines. No whispered rumors that reach him directly. If he senses scrutiny, he does not show it. The years pass without incident. The absence of consequence becomes part of the case's psychological gravity. A reminder that legality and truth do not always intersect where people expect them to. The family returns home after the final meeting, carrying something new and unfamiliar. Not closure, not justice, but a version of clarity stripped of resolution. They now live with a name that cannot be spoken publicly, a suspicion that cannot be confirmed, a truth that exists only in conversation and memory. It changes the way they remember the victim, not diminishing him, but reframing the last moments of his life as a quiet mistake rather than random cruelty. They begin to understand that the city did not fail to care. The city simply moved as it always does, absorbing impact without reflection. New York is built to survive trauma by dispersing it, and in doing so, it sometimes erases the lines that would have led back to accountability. The family learns this lesson slowly, reluctantly, until acceptance feels less like defeat and more like endurance. Within the department, the case becomes a reference point again, not for hope, but for humility. Younger detectives hear about it in training, framed now as a lesson in restraint, in the limits of certainty. They are told that some investigations do not end cleanly, that effort does not guarantee outcome, and that sometimes the most responsible conclusion is an unresolved one. The lesson is uncomfortable but necessary. The physical evidence remains unchanged, stored carefully, preserved against a future that may never arrive. The car photographs, the reports, the grainy images of a street that no longer exists in that form. They wait just in case. Cold cases are never truly abandoned. They are paused indefinitely, held in trust for a moment that may never come. Years continue to pass. Technology advances. New methods promise new clarity. But each promise arrives too late to matter here. There is no DNA to retest, no recording to enhance, no digital footprint to reconstruct. The crime belongs to a narrow window of time where anonymity still functioned, where routine interactions left no permanent trace. The killer, if that word even applies comfortably anymore, chose his moment well. The detectives who carried the case the farthest eventually retire. Some move away. Some stay in the city, walking streets that have forgotten what they once held. The case leaves them with a particular kind of fatigue, not from effort, but from proximity without resolution. They know something important. They cannot prove it. That knowledge becomes private, inert, a truth that exists only in the minds of those who touched it. The street where it happened continues to change. New paint, new signs, new residents who never ask what came before. The exact spot where the car was parked becomes ordinary ground, stepped over daily without recognition. The city does not mark such places. It rarely does. Memory here is personal, not architectural. Occasionally, the case resurfaces in quiet ways. A documentary idea floated and abandoned. A journalist asking questions that lead nowhere. A true crime forum speculating wildly, missing the point entirely. Each time, the investigators feel the same tension, the same brief surge of attention followed by the same retreat into silence. The truth does not need an audience. It already exists. What remains most unsettling is not the absence of justice, but the presence of understanding. The case no longer feels chaotic or senseless. It feels deliberate, contained, and complete in a way that denies narrative satisfaction. The murder did not spiral. It did not escalate. It did exactly what it was intended to do and then stopped. That efficiency is what makes it difficult to live with. The victim's final moments are imagined one last time, not as terror, but as normalcy. A familiar face, a brief exchange, no raised voice, no warning, just a misjudgment sealed in seconds. The ordinariness of it all becomes the deepest wound, because it suggests how easily lives can intersect and end without spectacle, without reason that satisfies anyone left behind. Cold case. The words remain accurate, but insufficient. They do not capture the weight of what lingers when answers exist but cannot be spoken aloud. They do not convey the exhaustion of standing so close to resolution that the distance feels cruel rather than vast. They do not explain how a case can feel finished without ever being solved. And so the story ends the way it began, quietly, without announcement. No arrest, no trial, no public reckoning. Just a city that continues to move, a family that continues to remember, and a file that rests in storage, heavy with implication, sealed not by justice, but by time. Somewhere in that stillness, the truth remains intact, unchanged by decades, untouched by consequence, perfectly comfortable in its anonymity. And that, more than anything else, is what keeps the case alive, not in headlines or courtrooms, but in the uneasy awareness that not all crimes demand resolution to succeed, and not all answers arrive in a form the world can accept. The case survives itself, drifting beyond the people who once carried it, settling into the institutional memory of a city that has learned how to coexist with unanswered questions. It is no longer discussed as an active investigation, but it is not dismissed either. It occupies a quiet category reserved for stories that refuse to collapse, suspended between certainty and proof, too complete to ignore, too incomplete to conclude. Occasionally, a new detective encounters the file for the first time. The reaction is predictable. Curiosity, then confidence, then confusion. They expect to find the gap, the obvious mistake, the overlooked witness that will finally unlock everything. They read faster at first, then slower until the rhythm changes and the realization sets in that the case does not break because it was never built around a single failure. It was built around restraint. These detectives often linger on the same details their predecessors did. The calmness, the efficiency, the lack of aftermath. Each generation arrives at the same uncomfortable understanding independently, as if the case teaches its lesson repeatedly to anyone willing to listen long enough. The lesson is not about technique. It is about limits. The family continues to age, carrying the weight in quieter ways. Anniversaries are marked without ceremony. Conversations about the victim are no longer raw, but they are never casual. His name still changes the temperature in the room, still draws a pause before it is spoken. They have learned how to live around the absence, shaping their lives to accommodate a truth that cannot be shared publicly. There are moments when anger resurfaces unexpectedly, triggered by unrelated injustice, by news of another case solved decades later through luck or confession. Those stories reopen old wounds, not because they promise hope, but because they underline randomness. Resolution, it seems, is not always earned. Sometimes it is stumbled upon. That knowledge is harder to accept than silence. Within the department, the case becomes a reference point in discussions about ethics as much as investigation. How far can suspicion go without evidence? How much certainty is enough to act? Where does responsibility end when the law cannot follow conviction? These conversations are quiet, hypothetical, but they matter because they shape how future cases are handled, how restraint is valued alongside aggression. The individual who once intersected with the case remains untouched by it in any visible way. Life progresses. Milestones accumulate. Time does what the law cannot, smoothing everything into normalcy. If memory exists, it is private. If guilt exists, it is invisible. The world offers no mechanism to interrogate either without proof, and so it does not try. The street remains indifferent. Footsteps pass over the same ground without awareness. The city has rewritten itself so thoroughly that even those who know the story struggle to align memory with geography. This erasure is not malicious. It is structural. Cities survive by forgetting just enough to keep functioning. Sometimes, late at night, someone revisits the file not because they expect discovery, but because the case exerts a gravitational pull. It asks a question that never expires. What does justice look like when it cannot be delivered? Is knowing enough? Or does truth require witness to exist meaningfully? The answer, if there is one, shifts depending on who is asked. For some, the case represents failure. For others, it represents honesty, an unwillingness to force resolution where none can be proven. For the family, it is simply their reality, a permanent condition rather than a question. As years stack into decades, the language around the case softens further. Words like suspect and theory give way to phrases like understanding and likelihood. The tone becomes reflective rather than urgent. This shift is subtle but irreversible. It marks the point where investigation yields to interpretation. The murder itself, stripped of its procedural frame, begins to resemble a parable more than a case study. A reminder that control can be exercised quietly, that violence does not require chaos, that endings do not always announce themselves as such. These ideas linger, influencing how those who know the case perceive other crimes, other silences. Cold case. The label persists, but it no longer captures the complexity of what remains. The case is not cold in the sense of forgotten. It is cold in the sense of preserved, frozen at the moment where action gave way to understanding, where certainty exceeded authority. And so it continues, existing without resolution, without confession, without consequence. Not because no one cares, but because caring does not always produce justice. The truth, intact and unspoken, rests where it always has, embedded in ordinary moments, protected by time, and unreachable without the one thing the case never received. A mistake. Not from investigators, not from the family, but from the person who understood the stakes perfectly and acted once, cleanly, and never again. Eventually, the case reaches a kind of stillness that feels less like waiting and more like acceptance, not because anyone has stopped caring, but because the shape of the outcome has finally revealed itself. Not an ending, not justice, but permanence. The understanding that some truths settle into the world without ceremony, becoming part of its structure rather than its stories. The file remains accessible, never sealed, never closed, but rarely touched now except by those who feel compelled to understand its gravity firsthand. When it is opened, it does not feel old. It feels precise. Every line still sharp, every absence still deliberate. Time has not eroded the case. It has clarified it. What once felt confusing now feels intentional, and that realization is its own kind of resolution. The detectives who once carried the weight of the investigation speak about it less often, but when they do, their language is careful, almost philosophical. They no longer ask who did it. That question has lost its urgency. Instead, they ask how it was possible for the truth to exist so clearly without ever becoming actionable. The answer, they know, lies in timing, in proximity, in the narrow margins where legality and certainty fail to overlap. The family reaches a stage where the case is no longer something they pursue, but something they carry. They stop waiting for phone calls that will never come. They stop scanning news headlines for familiar phrases. In place of hope, something steadier takes root. A quiet resolve to remember accurately, to resist the erosion of time that turns people into abstractions. The victim remains vivid in their lives, defined not by how he died, but by everything that came before it. They understand now that the absence of a verdict does not invalidate their loss. That justice, in its formal sense, is not the only measure of truth. What happened happened. Who was responsible exists somewhere in the world. These facts do not change simply because they cannot be proven in court. The law may require closure, but grief does not. The city, relentless in its forward motion, absorbs the case fully at last. The murder becomes part of a layer beneath the present, invisible but foundational, like countless other moments that shaped its character without leaving monuments. New crimes rise and fall. New investigations command attention. The old case recedes, not into obscurity, but into context. Occasionally, someone outside the official circle stumbles upon the story and feels its pull. A researcher, a writer, a student of criminal history. They sense that there is more here than the record admits. They chase the same threads, arrive at the same conclusions, and encounter the same barrier. The realization is always the same. The truth is not hidden. It is simply unreachable. What makes the case endure is not mystery, but restraint. The knowledge that violence can be quiet, that endings can be clean, that the absence of noise does not equal the absence of intent. It forces those who study it to confront uncomfortable ideas about safety, familiarity, and the assumptions people carry into ordinary moments. The night in 1995 is no longer replayed as a crime scene. It is understood as a decision point, a moment when one person misjudged another, and another acted without hesitation. Everything after that night has been consequence, not continuation. The crime did not echo because it was never meant to. Cold case stories often promise eventual revelation, a confession dragged into the light, a final chapter that restores balance. This one offers no such comfort. Its power lies in what it denies. It denies spectacle. It denies redemption. It denies the idea that time naturally bends toward justice. Instead, it leaves behind a quieter truth, that some people live their entire lives adjacent to acts that define others, untouched and unmarked. That some losses never receive public acknowledgement beyond a line in a database. That understanding does not always lead to accountability. As the case fades from active memory, what remains is not frustration, but clarity. A recognition that the world is capable of absorbing acts of precision without disruption. That normalcy can survive atrocity if the atrocity is contained enough, careful enough, quiet enough. The file rests where it has rested for years, unchanged, undisturbed. It does not demand attention anymore. It simply exists, a silent record of a moment when everything aligned for an answer that could never be spoken aloud. Cold Case, New York, 1995. The words still describe the facts, but the story has outgrown them. What remains is not a question waiting to be answered, but a reality waiting to be acknowledged. That sometimes the most complete crimes are not the ones that evade justice by accident, but the ones that never required luck at all. The last thing the case teaches is silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of restraint so complete it reshapes how truth is understood. By now, the investigation has receded into a kind of institutional afterlife, no longer active, never closed, existing as a reference rather than a pursuit. It is cited sparingly, with care, because those who know it understand that speaking too loudly about it risks misunderstanding its nature. There is no final memo announcing an end. No formal declaration that the search is over. The case simply stops generating movement, like a tide that has reached its furthest point and begun to withdraw without spectacle. Resources are redirected. Priorities shift. The file remains exactly where it is, unchanged, not because it is forgotten, but because it has said everything it can say. The people who once worked it carry something forward with them, something difficult to articulate. A heightened awareness of how fragile certainty can be, how easily truth can exceed authority. They recognize patterns more quickly now, not just in crimes, but in people. Calmness in the wrong place. Familiarity where caution should exist. The quiet confidence of someone who knows there will be no consequences. These signals linger in their perception long after the case itself fades. The family continues to live their lives, shaped subtly by what they know and what they cannot prove. They no longer imagine confrontations or confessions. They imagine moments, private and small, where memory asserts itself without warning. A streetlight, parked car, a pause before a conversation begins. The case has taught them that endings do not always arrive as events. Sometimes they arrive as understanding. They stop asking why the city did not give them justice and begin asking how the city learned to live without it. The answer is everywhere. In the speed of the streets. In the way attention moves on. In the way even profound loss can be absorbed into routine. New York survives by dispersing meaning, by refusing to let any single story define it for too long. Somewhere, the person who once stood by that car continues to exist within the flow of ordinary life. No spotlight follows him. No reckoning interrupts his days. If he remembers the night, it is integrated into his history without ceremony. Another completed task in a life otherwise uninterrupted. The world has offered him what the law could not: invisibility. That invisibility is the final barrier, stronger than alibis, stronger than time. It protects not just the individual, but the structure that allowed the act to pass without friction. The case becomes an example not of investigative failure, but of how perfectly a crime can align with the assumptions of normalcy. The street has forgotten completely now. Not symbolically, literally. No marker, no memory embedded in the landscape. The city has paved over the coordinates of the crime, replacing them with something useful, something profitable, something alive. This erasure is not cruel. It is efficient. Those who know the story understand that efficiency was present from the beginning. In the choice of moment, in the choice of location, in the choice to act once and never again. The murder did not spiral because it was never meant to. It was an interruption designed to end something quietly. Cold case files often wait for miracles. This one waits for nothing. It exists as a completed arc without resolution, a contradiction that forces those who encounter it to confront uncomfortable limits. The law demands proof. Memory demands meaning. Between them lies a space where truth can survive without consequence. As the final years pass and the people connected to the case grow older, the urgency dissolves entirely. What remains is perspective, an understanding that justice is not an absolute force, but a conditional one, dependent on timing, evidence, and human error. Remove any one of those elements, and even the clearest truth can become inert. The night in 1995 has become immutable, not because it is hidden, but because it is finished. There is nothing left to extract from it. No leverage, no surprise, just a moment that unfolded exactly as intended and then vanished into the fabric of the city. Cold case is the label history assigns when it runs out of verbs. And so the story concludes without resolution, without confession, without punishment. Not with anger, but with clarity. A recognition that some crimes succeed not by chance, but by design, and that the world, vast and busy and forward-moving, is often willing to accept that success in exchange for the comfort of continued normalcy. The file remains where it always has, untouched, intact, complete in every way except the one that matters most. What endures after everything else has thinned out is not the case itself, but the awareness it leaves behind, a low, constant signal that never fully fades. The investigation has long since slipped beyond action, beyond momentum, into something quieter and more difficult to dismiss. It has become a presence rather than a process, a reminder embedded in institutional instinct and personal memory alike. Those who once worked it notice the change most clearly in themselves. They hesitate longer before dismissing routine details. They reread notes that seem too clean, too orderly. They have learned that chaos is loud, but intention is often silent. The case taught them that the most dangerous moments are not the ones that look dangerous, but the ones that look ordinary enough to pass without resistance. The family carries forward a truth that never needed official confirmation to exist. They know how the story feels when it is complete, even without a verdict. They have learned to live without answers that can be spoken aloud, replacing them with something heavier and more private. A certainty that does not seek validation. A grief that no longer asks permission to be real. They stop explaining the case to others. There is no benefit in it. Too many people want a twist, a reveal, a clean ending. This story offers none. It offers only a recognition that some losses settle into the world without resolution, altering lives quietly, permanently, without spectacle. The city continues to absorb everything. It always has. It absorbs crimes, memories, people. It absorbs even certainty when certainty cannot be proven. New York is vast enough to hold truths that never surface, and this case becomes one of them, layered beneath traffic and construction and the constant churn of new stories demanding attention. Somewhere within that motion, the person responsible remains unremarkable, not hunted, not haunted in any visible way. The act did not define him publicly because public definition requires exposure, and exposure never came. If there is consequence, it exists only internally, sealed away where no one else can measure it. The world has no mechanism to reach further than that. The absence of justice does not create imbalance. That is the most unsettling realization of all. The city does not tilt. Time does not slow. Life does not pause in protest. The crime fits into the world without resistance, and the world continues exactly as before. That seamlessness is what gives the case its lasting weight. Cold cases are often described as open wounds. This one is different. It healed wrong, leaving a scar that does not ache but never disappears. It is smooth to the touch, easy to overlook, but always present once you know where to look. Years from now, long after everyone directly connected to the investigation is gone, the file will still exist. Paper will yellow, formats will change, systems will migrate, but the core will remain intact, preserved not by hope, but by completeness. There is nothing missing from the story except permission to say it out loud. And that permission never arrives. The night in 1995 does not ask to be revisited anymore. It does not demand understanding. It simply exists as proof that some events end exactly where they begin, with a single decision executed cleanly and left behind without echo. Cold Case, New York, 1995. Not a mystery waiting to be solved. Not a puzzle missing its final piece, but a finished act that slipped through the narrow gap between truth and proof, and stayed there, untouched, as decades passed around it. The world did not correct it. The system did not expose it. Time did not erode it. It remained. And that is the final silence the case leaves behind, heavier than any answer, deeper than any confession. A silence that does not ask to be broken, because it already contains everything it was meant to hold.